our disruptive imagery up there, but you probably, if you have, there's a guy in a striped wetsuit looking out to sea. And every one of these pictures has a story. The guy in the striped wetsuit is in a shark-proof wetsuit. And what happened was these researchers in New Zealand decided on a disruptive idea of, instead of chainmail wetsuits and things to keep, sharks from cutting you in half, what if we thought from the point of view of the shark? And they looked into how sharks see things and what their vision was like. And they realized they actually are colorblind. And if you look in nature, things that are tasty and soft are very well camouflaged. Things that are poisonous or spiky, look at wasps, look at the banded coral snake, look at pretty much anything that's striped except a zebra. You don't want to get near it. So they developed this, and they did the tests, and the great whites down in South Africa, 15 came up and basically nailed a regular wetsuit, a dark wetsuit that makes you look like a sea lion, which is the great white's favorite mammal meal. And the number of sharks that approached the striped wetsuit, there were 24 of them. They came right up in attack mode, stopped, kind of went around, kind of looked at it, and then went away. 100% success rate. So, okay, this is kind of a wild leap, but I am suggesting that thinking like a shark, actually not viewing something as an adversary, and how do we put up the metal gates, but thinking, putting yourself in his ocean is the route to world peace. We have to look at other cultures not as, okay, how do we deal with these guys? How do we keep them from coming in the border? And instead say, we're all humans. How are these very different seeming humans, how do they think? How are they raised? What goes through their minds? And our next speaker has gained fame by describing growing up in Iran and having an immense affinity for the Iranian people and encyclopedic knowledge of the Persian Empire and Zoroastrianism and the history of Persia, and has become sort of a cause célèbre, wrote a book, and has gone to sold-out audiences, mostly of American Iranians, who just wanted to hear somebody who actually thought like they did and knew what they were like. So in a weird way, this is cultural disruption, because currently we're taught, US good, Iran bad, US good, Iraq bad. And so this is a disruptive way of looking at our cultural relationships. And our next speaker, Terence Ward, grew up in Iran and knows everything and is my brother. So can I have a big hand?
Thank you, Kev. No, it's wonderful to be here, and also both Kevin and I were born in Colorado. He's lived here for far longer than I have, but this is the first time I've been back in about 25 years, and I feel at home. So, thank you for that. Kevin is really. I tip my hat to him because, as disruptor-in-chief and as brother number two to disruptor-in-chief, I always have to bow. He's done something marvelous here and offered us a different way of looking. And what I'm going to share with you is also a bit disruptive because, you see, where I come from, I married an Italian, Idan, who's here with us today, and I've spent about the last, I'd say, 20-odd years based in Florence and then coming back to New York every once in a while for our work and juggling between two worlds. In the States, we all know what the image of Iran, I don't have to portray it to you right now. But in Florence, something very strange happens. Whenever I'm talking to somebody about that part of the world, the first thing they say is, l'antica Persia, ancient Persia. And then they start to talk about the Giardino Boboli, the Boboli Gardens, and how it resembles a Persian garden. Or they talk about the cupola Brunelleschi. Well, actually, that mirrors a cupola that you'll find over in Isfahan. And then they'll even mention, Florence is the sister city of Isfahan. Ecco. There's a deep affinity, strangely enough, in Italy because being an older country, having a politics of betrayal, and also having been run as a theocracy, but having a culture that trumps all of those incidentals of today and actually give that culture and that country its great drama and great attraction to us all. They see a similarity with Iran. So I get a totally different reaction when I go from country to country. And what I wanted to do is share with you 3 ideas at the beginning, just disruptive ideas. At Stanford, at the dean of the electrical engineering school, which of course is computer engineering, he was asked, what is the finest undergraduate computer program that's in the university in the world? Where is it? What is it? And he offered a very surprising response. He didn't say MIT, didn't say Stanford. Do you know where it is? Do you know what it is, what it's called? I mean, this is one of the great kept secrets. Any ideas? It's called Sharif University, and it's in Tehran. I said, in Tehran? You must be kidding. And he said to me, no. He said, in fact, we reserve 15 places. It's the largest incoming group of students into our master's and postgraduate programs of any university on earth. I said, you must be kidding. He says, no. And we take the first 15 graduates. I said, but wait a minute. What about getting visas? How do you get over that? Visas? We give them green cards on arrival. All right? Any of us know that? Green cards on arrival from Sharif University. And I've just heard from another friend who confirmed that Columbia, NYU do the same. So Sharif has an outtake that comes into America every year. And many of them are in Silicon Valley. But here's another piece of information you may not know. If you had to guess what percentage of the university students, 10 universities in Iran, let's talk about how many women. What would be the percentage of women in universities? 35%? That sounds about right. 2 guys for every gal. It's actually the reverse. It's about 70%. And they're not taking economics, or they're not taking marketing. They're taking physics, they're taking mathematics, hard sciences. 60, 70%. And the third piece of information that I really find compelling is if you had to estimate what percentage of Iranian families attend Friday prayers. Now we're getting to the nut of it, right? We have this image of this country. Give me a percentage of Friday prayers, families, Iranian families. 80%? No, that sounds about right. Sorry? 15%? 80 to 15. No? A little bit lower? 12? A little bit lower? 2%. Who said 2%? Brava. Okay. When I told this to my dear friend Hassan, who figures in this story, you know what his response was? Teddy, because this is a calculation done by the Ministry of Religion. He said, Teddy, government is always lying. They've inflated it by 100%. Only 1% go to the mosque. Now, what are we to do with this? Because it disrupts our whole image. First, we're looking at techies, super top techies. Secondly, educated women, but in a highly professional levels. And third, a secular nation. Problematic, no? Well, now I'm going to offer you 3 other bits of information. How many of you knew that Iranians were not Arabs? Yeah? Okay, so we finally understood the Shia Sunni, Iranian Arabs. We're starting to understand that it's a complex area. They are completely, when I say wired differently, we're talking about a complete science. They're different people. Secondly, when you start talking about soft power and you look at the power of film, images, cinema, Iran happens to have one of the most dynamic national cinemas on earth. At every single film festival you go to, there's always a Kiarostami film, there's a Mahmalbaf film, there's Majid Majidi has been nominated for an Oscar. 2 years ago, Ashghar Farhadi won the Oscar for Separation. This is a country completely enclosed in the center of Asia that speaks to the world. I asked Majid Majidi, how do you do it? How is it possible you can have these criticisms and have the... He says, Terry, the censors don't understand metaphor. They don't get it. And to give you a simple example, he said, because I looked at this film, he had this film called it was called The Color of Paradise. In English, that was the title. In Persian, it was called Rang Khoda. It means the color of God. But there was a little boy in the film, blind, who could see and feel every color. It's like what we heard about the wilderness. Could taste, could envisage everything in front of him, all of nature. Beautifully filmed work. His father, instead, was cutting down trees and turning them into coal. And I said to Majid, but Majid, listen, these mullahs, how is it possible they didn't see the younger generation that's blinded, but can see it all beyond the horizons, imposed blindness, partly through their inability to travel outside and whatnot, but can see it all, and the older generation that are turning everything into black. And he said, Teddy, they just don't understand metaphor. So many people have compared them to the Italian neorealists. Now we come back to Italy again, right? Italian neorealism. And then there's another piece of information that, another fact I'm going to share with you is Iranian Americans. Look at what has happened since they've come to this country. The great influx was obviously after '79, the revolution. They are, without a doubt, the most successful minority in the last 40 years. There is no minority of new immigrants that has a higher education, all masters, doctorates, doctors everywhere, engineers, professionals, and wealth accumulation, enormous wealth accumulation. So you have these elements that we see in front of us, but we can't focus on because there's a particular mindset that's being conferred on us. So I look for a little bit of water. And I'd say that mindset has a lot to do with our inability to learn from the lessons of history. Now, the only reason I'm suggesting the lessons of history are important is very much like we've heard all our friends, the scientists who have talked about the lessons of nature, the laws of nature. History, too, has similar laws. And that if we can't learn from those, we have no choice but to repeat the same mistakes. Now, I draw this just as an example of an incident that you may or may not know, but there's a friend of mine, thank you so much, there's a friend of mine named Taghi Amirani, who is currently doing a documentary, and it'll be groundbreaking, and it's called Coup 53. Any of you have an idea of what he might be talking about there? Yeah? So we have 1, 2 arms that go up. And this is fundamental because every Iranian person knows this narrative. From a child to the mother to the grandmother, they know the narrative. And the narrative goes something like this. In 1953, the first democratically elected secular leader who wore suit and tie, named Prime Minister Mossadegh, had nationalized the oil in Iran. He said to the English nation and to the English company called Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, said, I'm sorry, this is our oil, this is our land. And this is the disrupting moment that I would suggest all the chaos that you're seeing in the Middle East today begins there. Because what happened was not that he could, like the Saudis and everybody afterwards, be given that oil and blessed with that oil. No, he had to be removed. And the British made sure that we, with our newly born CIA, had the capacity and their green light to do the dirty work and remove him. So, again, all the Iranians know that a gentleman named Kermit Roosevelt arrived in Tehran and started literally dishing out hundreds of dollars of bills, thousands, tens of thousands into the streets to foment what we call entusiasti pagati in Italian, enthusiastic demonstrators who then caused a counter coup, and then with that, Mossadegh is removed, and what happens? A very ineffective Shah is returned, but he's not returned with great strength. So he must build up the Savak, which is one of the great secret services of the Middle East in those days, trained by the Stasi and known for their terror, known for their torture, and that is how I would suggest he stays in power until 1979 rolls around. Now, what is the lesson of history? Getting back to Taghi, he would say, well, what would have happened if that coup did not take place? Would there have been a Khomeini? Now, on the eve of the anniversary of the Great War, the 100th anniversary, people are saying, if that gentleman, that Habsburg prince hadn't been assassinated, Ferdinand, would there have been a Hitler? We were told earlier by Jordi that there are parallel universes. And what happens in the imagination of some countries outside our own is they look at those parallel universes. They ask that question, what would have happened? So, lessons of history. We made a journey, Kevin, myself, my mother, father, back to Iran. But I actually wrote a book that was published about 10 years ago. And I wrote it with the hope to try and share some lessons of history, share a deeper understanding of a culture that's terribly rich, 2,500 years. Kevin alluded to the Persian Empire, Zoroaster. You can't imagine how much has infiltrated both Judaism and Christianity and all our iconography from Zoroastrianism. Never mentioned. One of those great curtains that has yet to be unveiled. But I thought I was writing for a Western audience. And little did I discover that there was another audience that was going to take this work very, very seriously to heart. Now, so the first hope that I had was to try and explore some of the lessons of history so that we can put ourselves in other people's shoes. But the second thing was, it all began because this journey, a journey that began much, well, in childhood. Kevin and I were raised in Iran. When my parents arrived there, my father was working as an economic consultant and trying to help build the economy at the time. And we found ourselves in these two families, ours and this family called the Ghasemi, who were taking care of us. Our cook and his wife, Fatime, Hassan and Fatime, brought us into their world. Hassan would tell us stories. He'd take us into the bazaar. He would take us through the rites of passage of Persian New Year. And in a way, he was a guide into his culture. And we followed. After a whole series of events and these two families becoming one, my father decided that it was time to leave. And he decided, he had seen the repression of Savak. He had seen the extraordinary corruption that was taking place under the Shah's regime. And more importantly, he had seen how completely removed the Shah was from the reality on the ground. And he could feel some kind of writing on the wall, and he decided that he would bring the family back to the only place in the country that had its own foreign policy, Berkeley, California. So he brought us back. And then, of course, we had a tearful goodbye, farewell to this family that was like our own. And we always thought, well, you know, we'll go back, we'll visit. And then the revolution happened. And then the walls came down. And we lost not only all touch, but Hassan and the family disappeared like Dr. Zhivago behind this complete veil of unknown, of unknowing. So the decades passed. And finally, there was a moment where my mother saw Christiane Amanpour on television. She was interviewing the newly elected Khatami, prime minister, and my mother saw that, immediately picked up the phone to all four of her sons and announced, it's time to go back. I'm going back to find Hassan. I have to find the family. Well, you can imagine the reaction. You can imagine. I mean, one of my brothers was saying, arguing with my father, Dad, look, you know, I'd like to go. I mean, I've got 2 sons. And my father looked at him and says, look, I've got 4 sons and I'm going, you know. I mean, there's a whole disconnect in the male brain. And I would suggest that it begins with this obsession with rationalism. Because we knew that there was no address. We knew that there was no phone number. We knew that she had no idea of the village where he came from. Because we had learned that he had left Tehran. We had nothing. And my mother instead said, oh, no, no, no. Look, fellas, I have this. I have a photograph from 1967. We'll find him. To which Kevin said, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is a country with 2 million Hassans and you're going in with a photograph that's 30 years old. We began with this photograph alone. And what took place was a journey that began in Bahrain because that's where we had to get our visas because obviously there's no rapport between the 2 countries. So we picked up our visas in Bahrain, but flew into Shiraz, which happened to be convenient for the story I was going to tell because we arrived in the site of Persepolis where the early Persian Empire was founded under Cyrus the Great. You'll see Persepolis is off to the right. And we literally got into a van, a banged up, beat up van with a very suspicious spy who was accompanying us, supposedly as a guide, but he knew nothing. So he couldn't be a guide. I mean, Kevin knew more than him. Kevin asked him, listen, who built this, you know? And the answer would be, how do I know? I wasn't there. So he couldn't, and when we finally pressed him and said, but listen, do you work for the government? Are you a spy? He says, you know something? It's very funny. His name was Vaz. He says, it's very funny. Sometimes you work for them, they don't even tell you, and they don't even pay you. So we have this character coming along with us, along with the driver, and you'll see this trajectory goes back past Pasargade, which was where Cyrus the Great's tomb can be found in this extraordinary bleak plain, but it's one of the great wonders of Iran. Then Abarku, then Yaz. Abarku is a town where even if you want to say you're lost in the middle of nowhere, in Italy we say, say it Poggibonsi, you're in Poggibonsi. Well, in Iran you say, you're in Abarku, So essentially we're going through the highlands of a plateau almost as high as you are here. It's a mile high in this Iranian plateau, and heading north with this photograph. When, by miracle, here's the spy denying that he is, in fact, what he seems to be, and my father suggesting we'll throw him out. Here, when we, by miracle, found Hassan after 29 years, you can imagine it was absolutely extraordinary. Against all odds, we came upon each other. Here's my mother, Kevin, of course, in the center, looking on Hassan for the first time, one of the little nephews down below. And it was complete pandemonium. But when we entered into the house, we found ourselves in a completely familiar setting. We found ourselves not only embraced by the family, but we saw things that brought back memories. There was my mother's sofa. My mother's sofa that she gave to Fatima 30 years before. There was, downstairs was the ironing board that had been carefully repaired and maintained over the years. There was even a 1950s refrigerator that now you buy as antiques, you pay a fortune. It's still running in their basement to this day. And there was on a shelf my father's beer mug. Now you can imagine when he saw that, and sure, you imagine the look on his face when it actually was full of beer and he got to drink from it. Pazzesco. So from that, I decided that it was time to write this book. The book was written, and then very quickly afterwards, it was translated into Persian by two different translations, by two different publishing houses. Because as there's no copyright law in Iran, the only answer you can say when people say, can we publish it, is Bafarmaid, which means please be my guest. So that's the backdrop. Then, I don't need to tell you, conflict and status quo tend to find partners. And in that difficult moment where America was lashing out after 9/11, trying to really place our foot in that part of the world, and Ahmadinejad became elected. Perfect. So you had two confrontational figures in our country and in Iran that actually used each other. In Iran, they'd say, my God, they must be brothers. I mean, every time Ahmadinejad's in trouble, Mr. Bush says something. Every time Mr. Bush is in trouble, Ahmadinejad says something. And there was this very surreal support. I mean, somebody's going to do a scientific graph of this, in the interrelationship. But it was traumatic because for 8 years, everything was frozen. I didn't travel back there. I refused to go back there. And then this year, actually in November, I got a call. Now, you know that there's been a new gentleman who's been chosen as prime minister. It is a sea change moment. One of the reasons why I'm here is because I wanted to share this with you. It is a radically disruptive moment in Iran right now. There are two countries, essentially. There's the old conservative status quo that you know only too well, and there's everybody else. Every year that the Pew does a survey on the appreciation of America and Americans in the Middle East, Iran always comes up on top with 70% appreciation. And all the Arab countries down around 10, 15%. And then there's the status quo. Well, what I get in this phone call and a series of photographs that arrive is news that there has been an event in Isfahan. And the event is that at the Khosar Hotel, there's this huge gathering, 350 people. And who's being honored? And I look carefully, and there's Hassan on stage. That fellow that you saw, no, he's on stage. The most reluctant hero you can ever imagine. He never would leave town. When I would call him, I always spoke in code during the Ahmadiyya years. I'd say, Hassan, how are the oranges this year? The blossoms aren't coming in like they used to. How about your grapes? Well, there are just a few. So I would let 6 months pass. I'd call again. So we always spoke in code about the various fruit shortages. But here is something absolutely inconceivable. 1 year before, here you've got 350 people in a packed house, and look who's on stage. Here he is. Hassan's there. Now, again, look in code. Do you see any beards on stage? No. That tells you something. You see some ties. In Iran, what you wear is a political statement. Those ties are an act of rebellion. What are they holding up? A copy of the Persian edition. Who's the only one who can't look the audience in the eye? Is Hassan over here on the side. He said to me, when I called him, I said, Hassan, how did you feel? He said, Baba, what were they bringing me there for? I know everybody wanted to find George Clooney coming through the door. Instead, they found me, very short, bald. What? Who am I, he would say. Well, what they said on the stage that day, this is his daughter, Mariam, to the right, beaming, and his son, Mahdi. What they said on the stage that day was, this is a man to be looked up to. This is a man that our younger generation should learn from and should model his behavior. This is a man who understands civility and dialogue beyond politics. Unthinkable a year ago. And here you see him. This is sort of a classic before and after. But again, in Persian language, the word darwish means very humble and also very wise. And so Hassan that day was being very darwish. He didn't say much. He accepted it very calmly. Also, I'll tell you what, there aren't that many people being honored in 350 packed halls, audience halls at all. Nor for a book like this, nor for a friendship like this. But now I want to take you to February because I said to myself, my God, something's really happening. And February I get a call. Mr. Vard, can you come to Iran in 4 days? I said, 4 days? You must be out of your mind. What are you talking about? No, in 4 days we are having a conference of, it's the 7th annual conference of Iranian Tour Guides Association. It will be a huge event in Kerman, and we would love for you to come. And I said to him, there's no way you can organize this. Oh, but you can go in I said, I'm not going to Rome to get a visa. That'll take a week. He said, no. We have one waiting for you. I said, waiting for me at the airport? Then, I said to him, listen, I don't get on a plane. I refuse, unless Hassan's coming. Funny, he said. That's exactly what Hassan told me. So, I said, look, I'll never get a chance like this. I'll head back. And here I'm meeting Hassan. And remember that little baby you saw in that first photograph I showed you? Well, this is Ali, 40 odd years later. Adorable. So here we are in the Kerman Hotel, and all of us had the same questions. What is going on? Well, we were then brought out to the conference hall and greeted by this. Now, I don't know if you remember your images of Iran, but the last thing that's ever photographed in any images is color, no? So these are all ladies that are wearing their traditional traditional outfits. Of course, again, it had to do with travel and whatnot. So you see the various colors, but no one is shirking from the camera, especially Hot Lips up there front and center. Hassan, again, the very reluctant hero, sitting down next to Fatima, who'd sprained her ankle about a week before, and some others. And then we enter inside. And inside, I'm going to share you a couple of clips that help you sort of enter in that world. So we enter inside and, sorry, whoops. Let me just, here we are. It's total pandemonium. Now, this is a traditional Bakhtiari wedding clarinet. 700 people inside. Everybody's screaming, cheering. So, if you talk about disruption, all my wires are now out. And I sit next to a friend of mine who I realize, it's Ali Afghar, who was one of the guides on our trip. And I said, Ali, what is going on? He says, hey man, we're not going to be like Iraq or Syria. I said, what do you mean? He says, listen, all the guys in the front row, those guys aren't going to do much applauding. I said, you mean the government fellas? He says, yeah. He says, but it's the back of the room. That's what they're all afraid of, the back of the room. Well, all of those folks that were applauding were the back of the room. And now I'm going to share with you something that happened. We heard the World Conference secretary, who was from Switzerland. She gave an address. Then the deputy minister stood up, gave an address. And shortly after that, a local writer was honored. And then they started to explain this story, the story of affection across the frontiers, across the borders. And then they played this piece that they had clipped together with photographs from Hassan, not from me. They had never even spoken to me. And this came on. Carpet that Fatima had woven for Idan and myself before we came. This is Hassan in front of his Juje Kaba. And then I knew I had to go on stage. That's the back of the bus crowd. the government officials not applauding very forcefully. So I gave my address partly in Persian, partly in English. And now I'm going to show you what happened when Hassan got called up.
آقای دقیق رفتار خواهش میکنم سریع‌تر تشریف بیارید به جایگاه که این صحنه تجمیل بشه.
It's very clear something's happening. Not only is this unthinkable a year ago, but after the event, in between the event was an a cappella group of women singing on stage in bright colors. And then they were singing a national anthem from the earlier time of before the Islamic Revolution. Everybody on their feet bellowing that. And I wasn't going to share that with you because you wouldn't know where to put that. But it was something very dramatic. Now, when I say there are two countries at struggle, Joyce always said, he said the mark of a great story is when it can rise from the particular to the universal. Now, don't ask me why and don't ask me how. Something that was in a time capsule 10 years ago has been brought out. The book was republished twice in 10 days, or reprinted twice in 10 days and sold out. People see in this story the same disruption that we've been talking about today. They see in this story a possibility that if these two families could retain this relationship over time, beyond the scars of politics and religion and all that we've heard about, and could still retain that friendship, there's hope for something happening on a larger level. So now we turn to another strange piece, which is, and I'm not going to share all of what went on between Hassan and myself, which was terribly powerful and terribly intimate. You know, he always says, Terry, why do mullahs dream in green? And I say, when I first met him, I said, well, out of respect, I was saying, well, maybe that's the color of paradise. Look around you here in Aspen, all the hills are green. He said, no, Baba, they love the dollar. It's very clear. Power is about that. And losing power is about losing that money. This is not about faith, it's not about religion. What's happening is a battle between arch conservatives who have held power and don't want to give it up, and the progressives that say, it's time. Basta, finito. You know how many times I heard people say finito in Italian? Just, you know, it's enough. So I go to Tehran, and whom should I meet but someone that an Iranian director was kind enough to put me in touch with, and he was a producer. And he's produced many of the films of Asghar Farhadi, who's won the Oscar 2 years ago. And he's extremely successful. And he's what you call the new Iran. He's like a Bazari. He's like a fellow from the garment district, no? Who then went into films. Think, you know, Weinstein Brothers. You know, that kind of, okay? But a very, very top businessman. He's made his money outside, so he focuses on quality of his filmmaking. And he sat me down. I talked to him, and I told him some of the story I told you. He said, listen, we need to make this film as soon as possible. This is a game changer. Not only I will pay, and he offered a figure that was rather extravagant, probably too extravagant, but I'm prepared to finance up to $2–3 million for the shoot here in Iran, from the minute people arrive to the minute they leave. Visas, permits, whatever you want, it will be taken care of. And I thought to myself, while he was saying this is madness. Because he's not only putting his name on the line, he's putting his company on the line, his family on the line. He's putting everything on the line for this story that a year ago would have gotten us all marched off. But he knows, because he's a Bazari, and they have very good scent appreciation, he knows that it's the moment. And by knowing it's the moment, he knows that there's money to be made, but more importantly, and I think some of us can appreciate, what a radical message this is going to give on both sides of the Atlantic. So I came back to New York with this bizarre piece of news, and I shared it with a friend of mine, Michael Mailer, who's an independent film producer, the son of Norman Mailer, who just happens to have named his son Cyrus, after Cyrus the Great, the illuminated ruler. I mean, you can't write this stuff. Anyway, so Michael says, listen, we can do something different. He even said it could be like an anti-Argo. Humanity above politics, solidarity above fear. Why not? Let's give it a shot. So I'm going to share with you some of the mood book, because in the mood book, you're going to see images that you haven't seen before of a country that you thought you knew. So I'm just going to share some of these with you. Obviously, okay, there's the image, but this is Tehran up against the foothills, and the synopsis, obviously. The summary. This is in Shiraz. So the proposition is, again, disruptive, groundbreaking, the first Iranian-American co-production since the revolution. I didn't tell you, but Ismail Merchant, prior to his death, had optioned the story and was desperate to do this film, because he knew, like all the films he had done on the British and Indian riffs after the Raj, he knew that there was a story very similar here. And he also knew that, like Room with a View, where Florence becomes the lead character in that film, that's what everybody remembers. It's not Daniel Day-Lewis or, Rodham Carter or whatever her name was, Helena Bonham Carter. No, bless them. But it's the city that was the star of that film. Anyway, Ismail knew that that was going to be part of his plan, and so Michael is teaming up with Bashar Films, and here are some other images. The hope is to shoot in April or May of next year, and of course to use an American director who will bring a fresh set of eyes so that you will see it as if new. And actually, when Michael came to Florence about 2 weeks ago, and he saw the city for the first time, he said, I would not want an Italian to be filming this city, because he was working on a film. He said, because he's not going to see it with the same grandeur that I see it for the first time. This is the hope that we want to do. So here you see the bridges, very much like the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, in Isfahan. Here's the great square of Isfahan with the cupola behind. Persepolis, the wilderness. There's Michael and Jamal Sadatyan of Bashar Films. Strangely enough, again, look in code. What's behind her? Those aren't Islamic images. This is the wing of Ahura Mazda. Behind that is the image of Darius, or Cyrus, one of the ancient Achaemenian or Persian kings. Nariman Hamed will also be a co-producer. Mark Peplow is going to be a consultant to the screenplay because he won the Oscar for his film, The Last Emperor. And he sees a lot of similarities between the two countries. Remember when Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter the color of the cat as long as it catches the mouse? Well, that is precisely the logic that's happening now in Iran. This question of ideology is out the window for 90% of the population. So he sees similarities between these two countries that are at that transition, that transformational level. So he'll be a script consultant. Andy Karsh, who got his film Moneyball nominated for the Academy, and also Against All Tides. Then here are some other images. The letters of commitment from Sadatyan. Aspen, Colorado. And we included comments about the book because it was kind of a game changer when it did come out. These are our equivalent of coffee houses in Kashan. The road north to Chalus along the Caspian Sea. Tehran. And there's something very strange that's also happened since we began discussing this. Nariman, who is finishing a documentary on Shireen Nishat, and received a call from Robert Redford, who was prepared to have an interview with him out in Sundance on Shireen's work and the importance of it. When Nariman went out to sit with him, and they had known each other before, Robert looked at him in the eyes and said, you know something? It's time that we do something in Iran. It's time that Sundance Institute has an exchange. And Nariman looked at him and said, this could be the bridge. He said, we have to start an exchange between our directors, between our actors, producers, back and forth. Bring them here, we go there. You see, Redford knows that when politics are stuck in place, it's culture that creates that bridge. Think of all the breakthroughs that have happened in the past. Even with the Chinese and ping pong, we all laughed. But for them, ping pong isn't a sport. It's a whole identification. Well, film becomes the way to enter Iran. And Robert knows that. So what he proposed is, and what Nariman hopes to do, is to use the film as the bridge that will be the test pilot that will start this dialogue. Not only, Tribeca wants to do it as well, because they also understand, anybody in the film world understands the importance of Iranian cinema. And to have an exchange at that level is not a lesser exchange, because there are masters there, masters here. So it becomes a question of parity and a question of dialogue. So I'm not predicting, because in that part of the world, everything is always, well, the one thing you can be sure of is uncertainty, but great moves are afoot. And I wanted to share this with you because you could see what my friend was saying. Look at the back of the room, Teddy. That's what they're all afraid of. And I heard that confirmed time and time again. So it's a radical moment now. We can reach out, or we can stick with the status quo. We know where that will get us. And, or we can think bold and think big and try and find ways of penetrating walls that we don't have to try and blast through, but we can simply walk around. Thank you.